This is Open Line.
Good evening and welcome to Open Line. I'm Emily Luxon. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Our topic tonight: should undocumented immigrants have access to in-state tuition at Tennessee schools? Of course, over the next hour, we want to hear from you with your comments, your questions, your concerns, any comments you may have on this issue. You can always give us a call at the number that will be on the bottom of your screen throughout the program, 615-767-7587. Or we are also streaming this program on the News Channel 5 Facebook page. You can also weigh in on the Facebook page, and we will do our best to get to some of those comments throughout the program as well. Now, joining us tonight, Senator Todd Gardenhire from Chattanooga. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
You're welcome. Good to be here.
You certainly know a lot about this topic because you are sponsoring a bill and have been working on this bill for the last several years. Tell us just a little bit about the bill in its current form, how it addresses this issue.
Well, it allows undocumented students to further their education and go to a college. The key is the university has to accept them, so they have to have the same academic standards as everybody else. They had to have been in our high schools or had a GED for 3 years in Tennessee. So we have already paid for their education, and then at the very end, after they do that, they have to sign an affidavit or that they will become a legal citizen of the United States and be accounted for. So it's we're not hiding anything. We're letting these students that have the brightest and the best that want to go on and get a college education do that.
How many potential students do you think could benefit from this?
Well, right now the calculation is there's probably about less than 1,000, and we have that many vacancies in our university system all across the state. So this is something that's very well needed. It has a positive cash flow to the state of Tennessee because we're not getting these students now, and this will be an additional revenue source for them. Keep in mind, these students, they don't get Pell Grants, they don't get Hope Scholarship, they don't get anything else. They have to pay the cold hard cash to further education, and I think that's really important. Plus, these students and their parents, whether documented or undocumented or illegal or legal, they all pay the same sales tax we are. We're a sales tax state. We're not an income tax state. And so therefore, every time somebody goes to the grocery store, buys their gasoline, buys a car, buys whatever, they pay the same taxes as everybody else.
When we're talking about the difference between in-state tuition and out-of-state, how much of a savings would that potentially be for one of these students? Well,
if you go to the University of Tennessee, it's going to be about $19,000 for out-of-state, maybe $10,000 for in-state. So I may be a little low on that figure on the out-of-state, but it's a significant drop. 6 years ago, when I first got elected in 2012, I met with several former state senators and elected officials. And one of them asked me a question. He said, Todd, do you remember the movie The Graduate? And I said, oh, heck yeah, everybody remembers that movie. And he said, do you remember when Dustin Hoffman was talking to Mr. Robinson, and Mr. Robinson said, son, said the future's plastic. And of course, at that time, when that movie came out, plastic wasn't a big deal. And so I said, sure, I remember that. And he said, well, I'm telling you, he said, the future is the Latino vote. You need to look into how to help that community. So I started looking into it. And it took me about 6 months to get a meeting with Latino leadership in Chattanooga. Had 2 priests that were head of some pretty good sized churches there in Chattanooga that all was Spanish-speaking churches. 2 businessmen that were very successful in Chattanooga area, and 2 Latino activists. And we met at the La Paz house that they had. And I asked 2 questions, same 2 questions I ask everybody. I said, what's the state of Tennessee doing right that helps your community? And what's the state of Tennessee doing that we could improve on or hurting your community? The first suggestion was I couldn't do anything about it, had to do with law enforcement. And the second one was they said, our kids can't go to college. And I said, sure they can. Everybody can go to college. They said, no, you don't understand. We can't afford it. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, we have to pay out-of-state tuition. And I said, why is that? And he said, well, because of the residency requirement in Tennessee. Now, I'll give you a brief history on that. It used to be the history to be a resident of Tennessee was 31 days. And so if you lived in Tennessee for 31 days, you were a resident, and you could go to UTC or East Tennessee State or Memphis State and pay in-state tuition. And people realized right away that somebody would live in Fort Overthorpe, Georgia, which is right across the line, send little Johnny up to East Ridge and live for 32 days with Uncle Joe, and he would go enroll at UTC and get in-state tuition and go back home to Fort Overthorpe and cheat the system. And so they finally changed that, and they said, look, if you're an unemancipated child, in other words, you're still under the care of your parents and responsibility of them, then your residency is determined by where your parents takes the tax deduction. So in that case, little Johnny's parents take the tax deduction on their Georgia tax return. And you say, well, okay, that's fair. Well, why does that affect us? Well, most undocumented children's parents are undocumented, and they don't pay a federal income tax, so they don't file that form. So in that case, little Jose is not a resident of Tennessee, even though he may have lived here for 15 years, may have gone all the way through K-12 through our school system. We've already paid for that, and yet he's not considered a citizen of Tennessee just because the parent doesn't pay federal income tax. So what are we doing? We're punishing the child for the parent's sins. Now, you can go back to the biblical days, and that's against the biblical rule that if you believe in the Bible and stuff, I do. But still, you shouldn't punish children for what the parents do. Now think about this one more time. I said you had to be here 3 years. Okay, let's back that up from a high school graduation, which is usually 17 years old, maybe 18 years old. That meant at the very least at 14 or 15 years old, that child would have had to stand at the border, throw their hands up, and say, Mom, Dad, you go into the land of milk and honey, I'm going to stay over here in poverty. Now, I'll bet you anything you want to bet, there's no child going to do that, and no parent going to let their child do that. So they came here, whether they knew what they were doing or not, they came here, they're with their parents. And so their parents are here, we've got them. Let me tell you this one last thing. The census shows that there's 9,400 Latino households in my districts. But if you go to the school systems, they know where everybody is. There's over 20,000 Latino households in my district in Hamilton County and Bradley County. By the way, there's also a huge group of Ukrainian students that were brought here by the Church of God and relocated into Bradley County. They would still qualify for this. Now, they came here for good reasons, but yet they'll be punished. Now, one last thing, who wins, who loses in this thing? If somebody has no high school education, doesn't get a high school degree, then the numbers are this. They're going to be a person that takes out of the tax system over $33,000 a year. If they have a high school degree, it drops down to $28,000 that they're taking out of the system. If they have some college, it's $15,000. But if they have a college degree of some kind, it doesn't matter if it's basket weaving or nuclear science, that flips, and they become roughly an $18,000 a year positive cash flow into the system. So if somebody thinks these kids are a drain on society, plug the dang drain. Get them educated. They're going to get the best that they have. They're going to be educated. They're going to be role models in the community. They're going to be taxpayers, and they're not going to be criminal or anything. They're going to be good people. So we've got them. We're not going to ship them back. I don't care what anybody says. So what do? We ought to do the best we can, get them educated, make them productive citizens in our society.
You've been working on this for a long time. Definitely been a labor of love. That's a long time. And tell me a little bit about just kind of how this has evolved in that time frame to get to where we are today. I'm sure there have been a lot of changes along the way. There has been.
When I first did the first bill, or got ready to do the first bill, everybody said, oh, Todd, don't do that. Don't do that. That's not popular. And I thought, okay, so I had a poll done by my polling firm that I use, not to see whether I should be for it or against it, but to see what the damage would be if I did it. And when I do my polling questions, I don't ask questions to get an answer that I want to hear. I want to find out what's really out there. And so I polled just the Republican voters in my district, and I ran as a Republican, and I won as a Republican. And I asked the question about this, how you would feel about in-state tuition for undocumented children that brought here illegal by their parents. It's about as fair a question as I could ask. 56% of the Republican voters in my district were against this idea. But I thought it was the right thing to do, and you know, I'm almost 70 years old, and I'm beyond the point of worrying about what everybody thinks. I'm going to do what I think is right, and that's fine. They can vote against me, this is America, or they can vote for me, this is America. So I go from that point. Then I had to sell it in the Senate, and I found out I had to have two bills. One was, what about the child that was born in the United States but whose parents were undocumented? They face the same problem because their parents didn't pay federal income taxes, but they were United States citizens under the 14th Amendment. So that passed the Senate and the House. The second bill had to do with undocumented children that weren't born here but were brought here. First two times I ran it in the Senate, it passed by 2/3 majority. It failed in the House by one vote when Speaker Harwell took a walk on me and walked off and didn't vote. And it went down by 149. It should have had 50 votes, and we had 2 or 3 members out that could have swung, but it didn't. So it failed the first time. Second time in the House, it didn't get out of committee. A lot of people objected to it. The other side rallied their troops and put out a lot of hate mail and disinformation about how terrible it's going to be and all this stuff. And so we had a hard time getting it out of the House. Mark White from Memphis was a House sponsor. He's done a great job. He's faced bigger odds than I have. My hat goes off to him because he's walked into a buzzsaw, but he keeps plugging away.
And here we are today.
Here we are today.
We are going to take a quick break, and we will come back with much more with Senator Todd Gardenhire. Stay with us.